But as I go through, hopefully, what you'll begin to do is understand how it may be able to assist your business, how you'll be able to grow your business by looking at social value, hopefully, alongside people and alongside us. So what I want to talk about is, David did ask me to talk about a bit about my story, about where enterprise for me came from and how I got to what I do now. And then a bit of an introduction to social value. Can I just ask, very broadly speaking, has anybody in the room heard of the term social value in the past? Other than David, because he's heard me talk before. Yes, okay, good. But it's very new, so I'll give a broad introduction to social value. Now, when I was looking at the Progressive Property Network, it is called the Progressive Property Network, and as Mo just alluded to, what I also want to say is social value part of being progressive within property? Or actually, should we care? And I want to kind of pose that challenge out there. The other thing to say is I've had a few interesting conversations already today, so please interrupt me and ask questions. Don't feel as though you can't stop me to ask questions. If there's something controversial or something you want to challenge me on, please do so. And then obviously, where social value is going. So a bit of a foresight, I've been working in this area for 20 years, so in this geographical area for 20 years, but as well within social value. So looking at where it's going, both nationally and locally. And hopefully we'll have some time for some Q&A as well. Well, that went well.
I think you pressed the one on the side. Yeah, that's right.
There you go. Right. So I was speaking to somebody actually about where I came from, and the gentleman there mentioned I worked in prisons. That is where my story started with, but actually, going back to my entrepreneurial spirit, it actually went back a little bit further than that, and I apologise for being a bit blue about this, but just to start off with a little story, when I was in primary school, I was aged about 9 years old, and I found a Sun newspaper at the bus stop. Now, I discovered that the older boys within primary school quite wanted to look at page 3. So I decided that I would take this page 3, age 9. I didn't have much resources at the time at my disposal, age 9. So I decided that I'd go and sweet talk the school secretary, and I started to distract the school secretary whilst I photocopied page 3 and sold it for 10p to the older boys in the school. That was where my sort of enterprising spirit started from. It then went on to an illegal sweet shop within the school. That was quite short-lived because the queues got too big and teachers were going, why the hell is there a queue outside of that classroom that goes all the way across the playground? But I was always interested, and it wasn't so much the money side of things, it was always why people were doing what they were doing. Why suddenly were people buying sweets off me rather than just going to the sweet shop down the road? So that's where it started. I then started working with kids who had been excluded from school. And what I got frustrated was the lack of innovation in actually how you address some of those problems. People had strategies and policies looking at how we get kids that are age 13, they'd fallen out of the education system. So I started to try and look at that as an entrepreneur, not to make money, but to come up with innovative programs, innovative projects as a way of solving that issue. And then from there, I was invited into Leeds Prison, and I started to work on rehabilitation in Leeds Prison, whereas this guy comes in. Because when I worked in Leeds Prison, it was about 17 years ago, quite early on in my career. Now the first thing is I was civilian staff. The second thing was that we were all called the Care Bears by the prison staff. Because we were there to look at rehabilitation, to look at how we can help those prisoners affect. And again, I took that not as a strategy, not as a policy, but actually looked at how we can try and set up innovative ways, whether it's inviting businesses in, whether it's looking at the Timpson approach, for instance, getting businesses in to look at how you recruit offenders, how you train them, how you inspire those offenders to actually try and make that difference. A lot of them wanted to go into construction. So in 2004, I set up Construction Leeds, which was at that time a public partnership, local authority. And for those of you who work closely with, as I'm sure you all do, with planners and everyone else, you can imagine what this was like. So I was working between the local strategic partnership, public sector bodies, DWP, various others. It was like trying to change the direction of an oil tanker. Because all I was really trying to say was, there is all this property being built. This was just before the recession, and there was £1.6 billion worth of investment coming into Leeds. And there was all these areas of debt prevention. We've mentioned, David was mentioning the greenhouse just down in Beeston Hill. There are these areas and pockets of real poverty in Leeds. So we were looking at how we can do that. And I can say this because they're not here, but I'd say it if they were here anyway. The public sector was saying, oh, but we have a strategy. And I was saying, well, how the hell does that help the property company? How the hell does that help the businesses who are investing in this area to actually make an impact on those various areas? And a lot of what we did was talk about innovative ways. And it's always something, particularly within the public sector, but I do see it more in businesses as well, that people always talk about innovation. I think sometimes we forget about the way things have been done previously. And I had a lot of joy in telling Leeds City Council that one of the best social policies that I'd seen around how to integrate investment into local community benefits and local regeneration was actually from 1976, and it was their own policy. So that's the area that I started to work in. Now you're probably looking at me now thinking, what the hell is this document to do with me? Okay? So, but what Construction Leeds, which is now a national consultancy, so now we work nationally, and I'll explain a little bit more about what we do, and hopefully the pieces of the jigsaw will start to fit together. But what we started to look at was a different approach to doing things, and I call it radical collaboration. It's a bit like what you're doing here. Now this is great because you've got a group of property professionals that are all willing to help each other and advise and guide. What we started to look at was, how can we learn from all of the different sectors? How can we learn across what, as I said, what we term as kind of radical collaboration? So it's not a negotiation, it's not an argument between public sector and private sector. It's looking at, well, what are we both trying to achieve, and who do we need to bring in to help us achieve that for what we both want? So out of the speed networking, just to pick up on one very quick point, and there was another point mentioned earlier, two practical points. We've mentioned HMOs, or HMOs have been mentioned quite a lot. There are a lot of help out there from local authorities, whether it's Leeds, Wakefield, or whether it's London local authorities, around empty properties. But you wouldn't know it, because the local authority prides itself on making things difficult for people to access. So where we do is we going down this road of social value, we can help open those doors and bring in the people that may have the grant money. They may be able to help with those sorts of activities, because as far as they're concerned, it's helping them achieve their strategy, as well as helping you make money and convert those properties from empty into use. It's a win-win situation. But so often, people just think in the silos of their own sectors, and there aren't those people in the middle trying to bring it together. And that is, as I said, what we do. So at that point, I started to be termed, there's this term, and I don't know whether anybody's heard of it, called the social entrepreneur. And that's what I got termed. And I actually don't like that term, because it makes me sound like I'm there enterprising just for the social good. I've got a mortgage, I've got to pay money. I don't also like the term not for profit. I am for profit, it's just that I reinvest what I earn and the profit my company makes back into delivering more social value. So that's my model of a business. That's not the right model for everybody. But I don't see myself being any different to any other entrepreneur. So I just wanted to get that one off my chest. So, social value. That is the wonderfully dry definition of social value. So when public sector, and we are talking now about major investments, so if there is a major investment, local authorities, central government, Leeds City region in this area have a duty to look at how that investment is going to improve both the economic, the social, and the environmental well-being of that relevant area. So it's all about the local economy. Not to get political, it does make me sound a little bit UKIP sometimes, which I apologise, but it's about local jobs, local skills, local supply. So it's about upskilling those areas within that local area, keeping that major investment or smaller investment that comes into an area within that local area, because that creates jobs, that creates skills, that creates businesses, that creates supply chain, that creates a network of local, relevantly skilled, qualified people to deliver the projects that you're trying to deliver. So you might be wondering why I've got a parachute here. I'm not going to ask people to put their hand up on this one because I'm just about to embarrass you. Charity parachute jumps. This is about taking in whole cost. So this was another conversation I was having earlier, just to put it in context about affordable housing. We know that we need 70,000 properties in Leeds. There is an affordable housing content on that 70,000. But if we stop people delivering because they can't afford to deliver the affordable housing, then the houses won't be built. But that's where the conversation stops. What we're looking at doing in Leeds, for instance, and we're starting to talk to other local authorities about it, is where's the affordable housing better built? How is that affordable housing better managed? So there are social housing providers. There's an organisation in Leeds called the Leeds Community Homes that specifically look at empty properties. So if there's a way that those contributions in affordable housing contributions can be rediscussed, not renegotiated, but rediscussed and looked at as a more global scale, if you will, then suddenly those developments, whether they're 20 houses or whether they're 2,000 houses, start to come forward, and that benefits everybody. So that's really what we're trying to achieve. But back to the parachute jump. For every £1 that is raised by somebody jumping out of a plane for charity, costs the NHS £13.75 in fixing them. Now for me, therefore, the charity parachute jump is not a very good example of social value, because what you're doing is you're putting the cost somewhere and not looking at it somewhere else. And that's what I mean when I talk about life cost. Looking at a development, we need to look at that investment over the full lifetime of that development. If you build a well-insulated home, are you going to help alleviate fuel poverty? If you can help alleviate fuel poverty, are there grants out there that can help you do that, which can help go against your affordable housing contributions? Does the money that you get spent on CIL, on Community Infrastructure Levy, does that go to where it needs to in your area, like Ellen Road, to improve the area that drives the value of your properties up? No. So it's trying to take a more life look at things, a more project life cycle. But what does social value mean specifically in the built environment or in property? It's very simple. As I've mentioned before, it's all about employment, it's about skills, and it's about local supply chains, so the local economy. So part of our work is helping these projects to go forward. That employs builders, that creates jobs, that creates things throughout that supply chain. And that helps the local economy. And that's really what we're about. And whether it's Land Securities, whether it's Hammerson, whether it's Persimmon Homes, or whether it's a small or micro business developer, for me, it's about everybody. And actually, the approach we take with Land Securities would be exactly the same approach we'd take with any one of you. It's just that we charge them a hell of a lot more for it. So, what does CHI do? So, CHI, as I mentioned, is a social enterprise. One of the ways in which I hope or think that we may be able to get something out of today, not us but yourselves, is social value opens doors. It allows people to collaborate on an even playing field, because it's not a conversation about money. It's a conversation about how we can add value. And suddenly that conversation changes. We do feasibility studies, we do housing strategies, we look at housing market assessments in local areas. What housing requirements are there in particular areas? We look at planning policy, section 106. Now I know that falls outside a lot of people in this room, but actually looking at those contributions and actually using them to negotiate things like affordable housing content. We look at the overall strategies for sort of procurement, for policy, for those sorts of things, and that's how we can advise businesses on how to take their business forward within that group, within those policies that are being driven forward locally. But as well, connect people, going back to the network, with those bigger organisations, with the organisations that are working locally, that are probably talking about the same things that this group are talking about. So we work with the Chamber Housing Group, which is saying to the council, we want to build 70,000 homes, you want to build 70,000 homes, let's have a chat, rather than having a negotiation. So by connecting people, by looking at how we can do it and supporting businesses to actually grow and develop their business. So that is, we are, looking at the network, looking at business development, speaking to David earlier. We work with Situ locally, who are a big developer, but they went through, if you don't mind me saying, David, are you all right with me saying this? So Situ went through a very similar, one of their first developments, the greenhouse in Beeston Hill, went through a very similar problem that the current issue that David's going through. So the fact that Situ, 5 years on, and are now developing huge sites across this region, they can advise. And because Situ are part of our network and everything like that, we want to support those smaller businesses to grow as well. So the other thing that we have set up, which may be of interest, is that we've started to realise that social value is becoming a core service as part of most or a lot of businesses. So that's not meaning it's a specific person, it's not a CSR strategy, it's not a marketing strategy. It's just something that you do, and you probably do as part of your business anyway. But the thing is a lot of people, as we highlighted at the beginning, don't actually know to term it social value. So we've set up something called the Social Value Consultancy, which is basically a consultancy of industry experts. And as part of that, we have a housing expert that has been working in housing for 40 years, doing housing market assessments, feasibility studies, etc., to help businesses grow, which is exactly what we want to do. The kickback for us is if you develop and you employ people, and you may come back to us and say, well, our builder, we're contracting with this builder would like to take on an apprentice, and we say, brilliant, we can help them recruit a local apprentice. So the end game for us is that kickback of working with us on the actual development. So that's how we generate that social value. So, before we get on to the future, should this be part of the progressive network? Has anybody experienced cost rising within their build programs recently, over the last 6 months? I'm getting a few nods. There isn't just a skill shortage in construction now. The Leeson Farmer report in October called it a ticking time bomb. 20% of the construction industry retires in the next 3 years. 20%, 1/5 are going. I'm not even going to get started about Brexit, because that's a whole different conversation. If the industry as a whole, and I mean the industry as a whole, doesn't start to look at this and look at how they can support it in a small or a large way, then costs are going to rise. And suddenly they become, the return on investment isn't possible. At the same time as this, you're being drummed down with strategies of, we want more affordable housing. So you've got the perfect storm. So it's how we begin to address that collaboratively. Planning, consultations, the life costs, social return on investment, these are all things that investors are now beginning to talk about. We're talking to a lot of investors in London, particularly around the private rented sector market, that are actually beginning to ask these questions of their developers. Now, at the moment, this is only happening at a kind of essential living, Berkeley Homes, that sort of a level. But as with everything else, it will begin to come down that supply chain, and it will begin to come down the market. And from my point of view, this is not rocket science. It's very simple. It's just looking at what you're developing and what impact that can have and communicating that. It can also have benefit, and a financial benefit, because if you are developing in a social way, then people will buy into that. Greenhouse in Leeds 6 years ago was a perfect example of that. It's in one of the most deprived area in Leeds, but because it was looked at as an exemplar project and it was green and it was well insulated and everything else, they now have doctors, nurses, professionals all paying 150 grand for a flat in one of the most deprived areas of Leeds, where the average price is probably about 40. So there is a return on investment in financial terms as well. So where does the future come in? We were talking about the election before, and I won't bring that up either. But one thing, I will say one thing. One thing that Theresa May didn't really get was the power of digital and how that can mobilise people. And in the industry, we need to look at this. We need, the Farmers Report in October, again, said digitise or die. Now this is around how we become more efficient, how we better consult, how we better, and this goes for the public sector as well. As I said before, we spend just as much of our time working with the public sector as we do with the private sector. But the future of the industry is around digital collaboration. There's a huge amount of data. If you have to carry out a feasibility study on any of your developments, the data is already out there. You just need to know how to get it from the Open Data Institute. It's there, it's published. But again, it's bloody hard to find. But it's out there. So we need to get better at using that data and using the digital world to consult with communities, to promote your companies. You mentioned the social media side of things, and to show people that that's what you're about. And that will influence the investment choices, both in the public and the private sector. The other thing that we're seeing very much is that this used to be driven by the public sector. About 3 years ago, there was a bit of a sea change, and it is now actually being driven by the private sector. The private sector want this to happen now because they see it as a business benefit. So, I will stop talking and hopefully people will have a few questions. But what I would ask, after this very brief run through, I'm around, so please come and talk to me. Think about radical collaboration. Think about how you can approach certain situations slightly differently. If you want to talk about empty properties, or you think, is there someone out there that might be able to help with this situation? Please give us a ring, because if I don't know, I will know somebody that does. And it's not necessarily, it can be around planning applications, it can be around housing strategy, it can be around HMOs, it can be around social housing organisations. As I said, social value opens doors, because you're not going in there with an ask or a demand. You're going in there wanting to add value to whatever they are doing. So think about radical collaboration. I've forgotten what my closing line was going to be there.
Encore.
Think about real innovation. It's really like they bring people into local authorities to say, right, you're going to come in and innovate for us. They can't do anything. It's about the people in this room. It's about the individuals being innovative themselves and not, thinking about how they can do something. Don't always think the public sector are going to say no. Offer it anyway. See what they say. And then the last thing is around inspiring the future. We need to get more people into this, doing what you guys are doing. We need to get you guys employing more builders, employing more constructors, contractors, employing more local supply, so that all of it begins to really become a sort of sea change for local authorities, for local strategic partnerships that can see that this is worth investing in, that this is worth, they will get added value out of it. And if we get a collaborative approach to that, to prove that, then investment will follow. And that is me. if you do on this last slide, are these going to be circulated?
Yeah. That's
Well, anyway, if you Google constructing excellence, social value, if you've not understood anything I've said, I've written it down there. So I do a blog for Constructing Excellence, which is a national think tank, and I write about various things on there. I promise you there's no Care Bears or various other things on there, or me talking about some dubious businesses when I was 9 years old. So that's me.